Welcome to Train Signal. You're watching Lab 2, Wins in Server 2003. In this lab, we're going to take a look at several things. We're going to start off just taking a look at an overview of the network that we're working for, and that's the Wired Brain Coffee Incorporated network. We're going to look at capacity planning and what we can do as far as installing a second Win server, configuring replication partners, and then configuring a client to kind of go hand in hand with that capacity plan that we're going to talk about here in a little bit. Once we figure this set up and we have our Win servers replicating back and forth, then we're going to go into creating static mappings, talk about the deletion or tombstoning of these static mappings and other records, and we'll finish up talking about a Win's proxy agent, not only why we need it, but also how to configure that. Okay, let's get started first. Let's take a look at our network here that we're working with. Okay, so let's just assume, this is our physical setup pretty much. This is what the network is that we're looking at, or that we'll be working with here. But let's also assume here that this is our Wired Brain Coffee network, and let's talk about capacity planning here a little bit. Okay, what's going to happen? Server 1 currently has Wins on it right now, and this was installed in Lab 1. Okay, what we're going to also do is install Wins over here on Server 2. And for simplicity, we'll just mark that with a W. And what we'd like to have happen is our Windows XP clients and other clients that we have, and we could have, 200, 400, 1,000. The number doesn't really matter over here. Let's just say that we have 1,000 clients. And if we just have one Win server, they're all going to register at this one Win server, and we're kind of putting all of our eggs into one basket, into this one machine. It would probably be able to handle it from a performance standpoint. 1,000 registrations as far as Wins is concerned really isn't that much. But from a fault tolerant standpoint, we probably want to have two different Win servers. Okay, so what we're going to want to have is some of our Wins clients registering with server 1 and then some of them registering with server 2. This is very similar to the same concepts with DNS or with DHCP. We just kind of want to split this process up. All right, so XP1 here, we see that it's going to register with server 1. Well, what if we had another client machine? Okay, we may want this machine to register with Win server 2. And if we're going to configure this, we'd have to do it very similarly to how we did XP1 in Lab 1, except now we're going to configure it with the IP address of server 2, 192.168.1.200. Okay, so what will then happen, this Wins database will be populated with all the entries from, let's say that we split this up evenly, 500 clients then will be registering with server 1, and 500 clients will be registering with server 2. This works fine until we go to do a NetBIOS query. So we're trying to find information about server 1, let's say, and we query this Win server here, and we ask for the IP address of server 1. Well, server 2 may not have record of this or the other 500 machines that were over here. So what we need to do, although we split up the load between two different machines, now what we have to do is make sure that these machines are replicating back and forth. Okay, so we've got the double arrow here indicating that information from this database is going to be pushed into here, and information from this database is going to be pushed over into server 2. That way what will happen, these 500 entries that register with server 2 will end up coming over here, so that'll be 1,000 total entries in both of these machines. Okay, let's get started then. The next thing we'll do is connect over to server 2. We're going to go ahead and just install the Win service, just like we did in Lab 1. Okay, we got a little IP address problem here, so what I'm going to do, just to show you, is open this up. And we have two network cards in this system. This is a real simple way, an effective way. If you have two network cards in a system, maybe you have two different networks that you want to work with, and there's no reason that you want to join these two networks together. That's what I have here. I have the live train signal production network. That's with this system here that's currently connected, and then this second network card here is for the test lab that we're working with throughout these videos. So when I'm working on the test lab, what needs to happen is I just disable this network card, and you see it's disabled, and I come down here and enable this second network card. Okay, and then I do the opposite if I need to work with the test network, or I'm sorry, with the live production network. Okay, so now when I go back to my remote desktop connection here, it shouldn't have any problem. Okay, so I'm connecting right over to server 2, and we're going to install Wins on server 2 now. Okay, so with this, it's very similar to how we did it in Lab 1. We're going to go to Control Panel, then go to Add Remove Programs, select Add Remove Windows Components. Then once this is opened up, which will take just a second here, we're going to go down to Networking Services, and we're going to select the Wins option out of the Networking Services. Okay, and it's pretty quick installation. It takes less than 5 minutes. In most cases, you will need the CD or the source files. You may have copied the i3D6 folder off of the CD, and then, of course, you can access those wherever they may be shared. Okay, so it should be pulling up any second now. Any second now. There we go, finally. Okay, networking services. We do have DHCP installed in the system. We can ignore that for right now, and we want to install Wins. So I click OK, click Next, and it's going to start this installation process. So what I'll do here, I'm going to stop this video momentarily, and when this is done, we'll start it right back up again. Okay, Wins is finished installing, so we can click Finish, and we can go ahead and close out this window here. Okay, so we're still sitting on server 2. What we'll do is take a look at the actual Wins service itself, see what it looks like over here on server 2. So I'm opening up Wins, and right now keep in mind that really it looks exactly like it did on server 1. Nothing is set up automatically, so if we had a situation similar to like we described previously, where some of our clients are registering here, and some of them are registering over here in Win Server 1, well, they're just going to be unique databases, and they're going to be incomplete. Okay, let me explain this one more time just to make sure that you get this. If a client machine registers with one Win server and another client machine registers with this Win server, if no replication is configured between these Win servers, well, this database is going to contain information for XP1, and this database is going to contain information for these other systems up here. Okay, so half the time your name resolutions aren't going to work correctly. So that's what our goal is now. Let's set up replication between these two systems and make sure that's working appropriately. So we'll connect back over to server 2, and that's what our focal point will be here. We go down to here to replication partners, and notice that currently no replication partners are here by default. To add a replication partner, right click, go to new replication partner, or you can go up here to action. You have the exact same choice. Okay, so here, enter the name or IP address of the server that you want to add as a replication partner. So we could actually enter in that IP address if we wanted to. And we have some other choices too. If you go here to properties, we can go over here to enable automatic partner configuration. Okay, and what happens here is the Win server can use multicast to automatically configure itself for replication. Use this option only on small networks. So if you really don't want to mess with this at all and you just want your Win service to start replicating information, you can check this box. And what will essentially happen is your two Win servers will go out and they'll multicast, which is kind of a scaled down broadcast, and they'll find each other and start replicating. Okay, not the most secure thing to do in the world, and they're only recommending that you do it on small networks because this multicast is not going to get through and around to all the different Win servers throughout the whole enterprise. Okay, so we're going to avoid this. This is kind of an easy way of doing things. We'll just uncheck that, and we'll go about configuring replication differently. Okay, so we have some general settings here. We'll come back to these. First, let's come back here and set up our new replication partner. We can browse for a Win server, or we can type in the IP address. If we click browse here, it's just going to want us to enter in the computer name anyway. So we'll just type in server 1. Okay, check names. It's going to go out, broadcast, and it finds a server 1. If it didn't find that, for example, if I put in here bow tie for whatever reason, click check names, it goes out, it's looking around, and it's having a hard time finding anything. Okay, can't find anything. So it gives us this error message like this. Okay, so let's go ahead and put in server 1 here once again. And you can see then it just adds this as the Win server. When I click OK, server 1 is now automatically configured as a replication partner. Okay, and by default this is really, really simple. There's not a lot you have to do. We just basically enabled server 1 as a replication partner. It has the IP address listed, and the default replication method is what's called push-pull. Okay, and this is the simplest way of configuring Win's replication, less troublesome. you're going to find out that it's pretty simple and that replication just kind of automatically takes place. Okay, so let's take a look at this right now. We see that replication partner type is push-pull. By default, we have something called pull replication and push replication both enabled. Okay, and our default here, this is set at every 30 minutes. Okay, and up here we have this set at 0. Okay, and 0 is kind of having this disabled. So even though we have push-pull enabled here, the push portion isn't turned on by default because 0 is essentially disabling it. Let's come back to this in 1 second. Let's check out what happens, how this replication actually works. So if we're on server 2, let's go ahead and create an entry over here. Okay, and to do this, we're just going to create a new static mapping, and we'll talk more about what a static mapping is later on in this video. But for right now, just for testing purposes and to see if stuff replicates, we're going to just do it this way. Okay, so we're setting up server 3. Type, well, see if you look here, get unique, grouped, domain name, internet group, multi-homed. Unique is what we're going to be selecting here, almost always. IP address, just whatever IP address server 3 has, and server 3 is not on the network, so we'll just make up an IP address for it. So I click OK here, and now this is going to be an active registration. Now this is confusing at first. Now we're looking and, come on, where are the active registrations at? I just created one. I created a static entry, yet there is no information here. Well, what you have to do is, just like we did in Lab 1, you have to go up here to Action, Display Records. Okay, by default, nothing is enabled to show up, so you need to filter based upon what you want to see. Okay, and we're just going to filter records matching this name pattern, and you could type in a name if you want to see records that started with, let's say, server, because you have some server names. Well, we're just going to look at all of them, so I'm putting in the wildcard asterisk here, and I'll click Find Now. Okay, and you can see here it created records automatically, the 00, 03, and 20 records that we talked about in Lab 1. Okay, and these are automatically created. Now what I'd really like to see happen is for replication to take place. Remember, on server 1, we have several different records, but they're not over here on server 2. Now vice versa, we just created this server 3 record here on the server 2 Win server. Is this going to replicate over to server 1? Okay, well, if we want to check this out, we can go down here to Replication Partners. We can click Replicate Now. Okay, then we click Yes, and it tells us here the replication request has been queued on the server. Okay, oh great. So now when we come back up here to active registrations, let's refresh this, okay, and see if we can't find anything. Refreshes, and we still don't have that information from server 1. Okay, and this is an important step. A lot of people forget this. Even though server 2 was the second Win server and we just came here and we configured replication, we still need to go over to server 1 and tell server 1 that we want it to replicate with server 2. So that's what we're doing right now. We're going to connect back over to server 1, and we're going to enable replication in very much the same way we just did on server 2. Okay, so server 1's logged on. Opening up the Wins console. Okay, we look at our active registrations here. Let's see if server 3 records come up here at all. Okay, so we go to Action, Display Records. Nope. Okay, so that's not working. So come down here to Replication Partners, however. New Replication Partner. And now we're just going to put in the IP address, okay, of server 2. It's 1.200. So I click OK, and server 2, the name is found, it's matched up to the IP address, and replication has now been configured. Since we've configured both sides of this, our active registration should now change. If I were to refresh this, okay, look what's happened. Without me doing anything, these machines were set up, and now replication's taking place. Okay, and likewise, if I go over to server 2 here, we should see the exact same thing over on server 2. So we're connecting back to server 2. We're looking at a different Win server now. Here what the records look like just a second ago when we first created that static entry for server 3. If I refresh this, let's see if they've replicated over on this side yet. No, still haven't. Okay, that's okay. It sometimes takes a little bit more time, so we will give it a little bit more time. And if you want to try to force the process along, of course, you can click Replicate Now. Okay, And eventually what will happen though, when we keep checking these active registrations, we should see all the different records show up here. Okay, just like we have right now. So now these two Wins servers have synchronized their databases, and these two Wins databases, it doesn't matter which client connects to which Wins server because both of these Wins servers contain the exact same information. Let's go back over to the client machine and talk about that. So if we come over here to the XP1 machine and we go to network connections, we're going to take a look at the TCP/IP settings on client 1 or XP1. Okay, if we come here to Wins, we see that just one IP address is currently configured, 192.168.1.100. Well, we can add the second Wins server as we do right here, and because these are listed in this order, it tells us right here, Wins addresses in order of use. 100 will be used before 200. If you wanted to change that, select it, click the up arrow. 200 is now the first Wins server that's actually going to be tested out and used. Now what you'd want to do, assuming we had those 1,000 computers that we were talking about before, well, on 500 of them, that's going to be set like this, and on the other 500, we're going to set them like this, where 100 is before 200. That way, we're getting the most and best usage out of our two Wins servers on the network. Okay, so we can click OK here. And what we're going to do now is focus on some settings that you need to be careful with on your Wins servers. Okay, so we're going to go back over here to server 2 and talk about this. If you look here, one thing that's very much recommended against is going to your network cards. You want to make sure that you don't have two network cards in your Wins server. And this one is disabled, so it's not really causing problems. But if you were to enable this, you could really have some issues with Wins getting confused and registering, the IP address with one of these network cards or the other. So on a Wins server, as a rule of thumb, you only want to have one network card. They really shouldn't be multi-homed. Okay, multi-home meaning having two network cards. Another thing to watch out for is the Wins server configuration. If we take a look at this server, and remember this is server 2, and it is a Wins server, it should be pointing to itself, okay, and itself only for a Wins server. Okay, so yeah, we have another Wins server in the network at 100, but we don't want to add that on this Wins server. It can lead to database corruption. So this is something that you need to make sure that you specify correctly. And the same thing is going to apply over on server 1 as well. If we go ahead and minimize this, and now we connect back over to server 1, here in this network settings, we're going to configure Wins so this machine is only pointing to itself as well. And it may already be that way, but we're going to double check it. Okay, advanced, Wins, and it has nothing configured. So we have it point to itself, but not the other Wins server. Okay, and that's the proper way to set up and configure a Wins server. Okay, IP settings, Wins pointing to itself, only one network card. Okay, and then you should have a normal functioning Wins server on both sides. Now we're going to connect back over to server 2, and we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about push and pull partners. Okay, we didn't really spend much time yet here. We just set up our replication partners. So we're going to take a closer look at this actual properties here. If I right-click replication partners and come here to properties, I have several different settings that we can configure here. Okay, well, one thing, replicate only with partners. That's something we want. Overwrite unique static mappings at this server. Okay, this is something we don't really need to worry about too much. Okay, but if you have a static mapping, this will explain it to us better. Specifies whether static mapping entries of unique and multi-home type records in Win database can be overwritten, treated as dynamic entries when they conflict with a new name registration or replica. So if you created a static entry and all of a sudden there's another a Wins machine, a Wins client is trying to register itself with the Wins database, should you leave the static entry or should you update it with that new information? Okay, so we're going to leave this as it is, which is the default. Okay, push replication. What you can do if you don't want to configure push-pull replication on the system is you can set up your machine to either engage in push or pull replication. Okay, we have a tab for push replication and a tab for pull replication. Now the difference here, push replication occurs after a number of changes in the version ID. And what that's referring to is the number of changes to the WINS database. So with push replication, you can set it up so maybe it only replicates after 100 changes to the WINS database, okay, whatever that number might be. The minimum here, by the way, is 20. So if you try to set something smaller than that, it's not going to work appropriately. When 0 is set, if you're using push replication, this is essentially disabling push replication. Okay, so this does it based upon the number of changes, while pull replication is based upon time. Every, whatever it is, every 3 hours, let's say, let's engage in replication. I'm going to take information out of your WINS database. Okay, so when we configure this, push replication is thought to be more bandwidth friendly. So if we wanted to replicate a WINS database across a wide area network, then in that case what we'd want to do is probably use push replication if we are indeed concerned with the bandwidth. Pull replication, this would be used in situations where we're not so concerned about the bandwidth, maybe on a local network or on a high capacity, high speed, wide area network link. We could use pull replication. Okay, and essentially what's happening, if you picture server 1 and server 2, let's go back here to our picture. We're just going to focus on replication here and push versus pull replication. Okay, so with push replication, what's going to happen is server 1 will keep getting changes. Okay, it gets another change and another change and another change and another change up until it reaches that number that we've set. And, by default we said, 20 is the bare minimum. So once 20 changes have occurred to server 1, what happens is it pushes a notification over here to server 2 and says, hey, you may want to update yourself. I've had this number of changes. Server 2 then is going to say, okay, sure. It's going to come over here and ask for that replication. It's going to ask for the changes of the database, and those will be sent over. Pull replication, like I said, is based on time. With pull replication, it doesn't matter if there's 0 changes or if there's 100,000 changes. With pull replication, whatever the time setting is, that's when this machine is going to come over here and initiate a connection and basically say, hey, now's the time. I'm ready to get those updates, okay, after a certain given period of time. What you can do if you want, you may want WINS replication to only occur one way. Okay, and if that's the situation, then you can have this server pulling information, or let's do it this way, this server pulling information from this one, and also this one pushing information. Okay, and if we're going to be doing it that way, we would set this up as the pull partner, okay, and this machine up as the push partner. Sorry about the spelling there, but this pen's hard to write with. Okay, so we've got a push-pull partner. What's going to happen then is the replication is going to flow in this direction. So all the registrations would be coming through server 2. We may have 1,000 entries, doesn't really matter. And that information is going to be replicated here over to server 1. Now this is important when we get into lab 3 because we're going to talk about a couple WINS design models, specifically the hub and spoke model, where we use a method like this. On a smaller network, the best way to configure WINS is to make both machines push-pull partners. Okay, push-pull, and we wrote pull over here first, so this will be a pull-push partner. Okay, and this is just the way I wrote it. There's no difference whatsoever in how this is, and if you look, in the configuration, it's actually called a push-pull partner. What this essentially means is, okay, when this one's acting as a push partner, this one's going to act as a pull partner. When this one's acting as a push partner, this one's going to be a pull partner. Long story short, both databases are replicated back and forth. Okay, so any information here gets over here. Any information on this server gets sent over to server 2. This is the easiest, most effective, most efficient way of doing this. Only reason why we even focus on the other ways, bandwidth is an issue, performance, and then also you just may want it to work out this way to avoid WINS database corruption. Okay, so those are our push-pull partner settings. Let's go back over to server 2, and what we're going to focus on now are static entries. Okay, static entries. You saw us create one static entry previously, but right now what we're going to do is just create another static entry and explain why we may need to do this. Okay, static entries are added here for non-WINS clients. Okay, non-Wins clients. A non-Wins client is a machine that's just not capable of working with Wins. So it's a Windows machine, like a Windows 3.1 or a DOS machine, but it has no way of registering itself with the Win server. So what we can do is create a static entry for that computer by going up to New Static Mapping, just like we did before, and we'll call this DOS 13 for whatever reason. Okay, and then give it an IP address 192.168.1.13, and then click OK. Now, look what happens here. Creates an entry. What this is allowing this to do, we're putting an entry in for DOS 13 with an IP address. This is allowing machines that are Wins clients, like XP1 or Server 3, it's allowing these machines to communicate with DOS 13 by using its name. Let's move back a step and talk about that. Well, if this machine's not capable of registering itself, okay, well, if we don't put a static entry in there, then every time XP1 wants to talk to DOS 13, it's going to have to know its IP address. So we're going to have to configure that. And some applications rely upon these NetBIOS names. So in this situation, what we end up having to do is we create a static entry. So now when XP1 wants to find out information about DOS 13, it queries its Win server like it normally would. Okay, so it's looking inside this database. It sees an entry here for DOS 13, and it's able to get the IP address and communicate with it in a way where DOS 13 is fully capable of communicating. Okay, so that's the reason that we create static entries. Static entries are created for non-Wins clients, and they're created to help out all the other computers on the network. It's a way of giving DOS 13 a name to go along with its IP address. So that's why we set those up. We're also going to be working with the Wins proxy agent here in a little bit. We're going to come back to that here in 1 second. Before we do that, what we want to focus on next is the difference between deleting a record and tombstoning a record. Okay, and to do that, let's first look at our diagram here and talk about a couple things here on this diagram. Okay, when we're deleting or tombstoning a record, the first thing we should be familiar with is the concept of an owner, okay, the owner of a record. And we've talked about several times having multiple different clients here on this network. So here's another XP system. And these clients are basically registering with these particular Win servers. Okay, so XP1 is registering with server 2, and XP, let's just call it 10, is registering with server 1. Okay, so these machines, these records are in this database, and the records up here and for all the other machines are in this database on server 2. Now, yes, replication does take place. We've configured that now. Okay, but nonetheless, even though the entry for XP10 is over here on server 2 and the entry for XP1 gets replicated over to server 1, there's a mark on these records, okay, and that's the owner of that record. And what that basically means is the server where that record was originally created. Okay, and that has a special meaning here in Wins, and we're going to talk more about that here in a second, but let's first make sure that we understand that. Since XP1 registered with server 2, and this is where the record was created, server 2 is the owner of that registration record. And since server 1 is the first place where XP10 registered its record, server 1 is going to be the owner of the XP10 registration record. Because that's going to have some significance here when we go take a look over on server 2. So we'll do that. We're over on server 2 now. And when we look at these records, just take a note here that we can, if we'd like, just right-click any of these records and delete it. Okay, very easily, and the record will then be, purged from the database. Let's also look over here and take a look at this owner column. Okay, this is something that we didn't look at all this information, but we have a record name, type, IP address we talked about. We also have owner, version, and expiration here to think about as well. Okay, so let's focus on this owner column because this is really what we're concerned about for this particular section. If I were an administrator and this DOS 13 system is no longer part of the network, what I can do is just delete one of these records, okay, and just get rid of it. So to do that, it's real simple. Just right-click, delete. Okay, but I'm posed with this question. It says use this operation to delete the selected record. You can delete the record from only the server, or you can replicate deletion of the record to other servers, which is an effect called tombstoning this record. Okay, well, deleting the record only from this server can lead to results that may be unpredictable to you. Okay, for example, let's go ahead and just delete this and choose this option. So I click OK here, and that record has now disappeared. There's still these other two, but we'll take care of those in a second. If we look over here to the owner of those records, and the other DOS 13 record that I just deleted was also owned by the machine 192.168.1.200, this plays important significance because we can delete records from here, okay, and these records will not show up again, okay, because DOS 13 was owned by server 2. That was the owner of this record. That's where DOS 13, the record, was initially created. Okay, so as long as you're deleting the record off of the machine where it was originally created, you're not going to run into any problems, and it's going to act how you would, expect it to act. If we take a look at another record, though, for example, we created a static record for server 3. If we wanted to delete this record from here, when I delete this and I say delete this record only from the server and click OK, what's actually going to happen here, over the course of time, this record is going to be added back in because we deleted the server 3 record from server 2, and the owner of this record is actually server 1, 192.168.1.100. Oh, I made a mistake there. It's actually owned by the same machine, okay, by server 2, 192.168.1.200. So a better example, let's go over to server 1, and we'll look at the WINS database over here. Okay, here's the server 3 record we were just referring to here a second ago. Let's force replication. Let's see if this is actually, let's see if this is taken care of. So I refreshed right now. All these records still exist here, so that's not doing it. But let's actually replicate. Okay, and if we come back over here again, it may be too soon, but we'll try it out, see if we refresh. Okay, all the records for server 3 are still here, so they have not been deleted yet. Let's worry about this bottom one here, though, because this one we haven't touched yet, so we can do our demonstration here. Server 3, IP address 192.168.1.23, owner 192.168.1.200. That's server 2. I'm sitting on server 1 right now, so what that indicates to me is server 1 is not the owner of this record. If I were to delete this record, okay, I'm going to go ahead and do this, delete the record only from the server. What's going to end up happening is once replication has occurred, this record is going to end up coming back again, because when you delete the record off of a machine that's not the owner of it, it's not permanently deleted. Okay, and what this really boils down to is one of two things. Okay, first off, if we're deleting a record, let's make the assumption that we don't want that record to be around anymore. And I think that makes sense. If server 3 no longer exists, maybe we took this machine offline and we want to get rid of these records. Well, we don't want the record to be around any longer. Okay, that's the goal here. There are two ways to accomplish this. One is to go over to the owner of that record, okay, 192.168.1.200, and literally delete that record from that one server, okay, so that's server 2 in our case. That will get rid of the record permanently. Our other choice is to do what's known as tombstoning a record, okay, and we're going to do that here with this record. I'm going to say delete, but what I'm going to do is replicate deletion of the record to other servers, or tombstone it. And it tells me here, tombstoning replica records will cause this WINS server to take ownership of the record. Do you want to continue? Yes. Okay, and something must have happened here where this record's disappeared because we got an error message. So we'll just do it on a different record. Let's do it on this server 2 record. And we don't want to do it on that one. Let's do it on XP old. Just to give you an example of how it works. Okay, so that record, if we look over here, is marked as tombstoned. Okay, and this is really what we want to focus on. The mechanics of this aren't so important right now. I just want you to get a feel for why we might do this. Tombstoning this record, what this is doing is basically stating that I want this record deleted from the database, But since I'm not sitting at server 2, who's the owner of this record, well, I just want to tombstone it. And what that means is when server 2 actually replicates with server 1, even though server 2 is the owner, it's going to go, oh, this record's tombstone, which means we're going to permanently delete this record. Now, the record will stay in the WINS database for a period of time, but this won't occur. This won't be deleted until we do what's called scavenging the database. And scavenging is just pretty much going through and getting rid of all the old stuff that you no longer want to be within the WINS database. Okay, so that's what's going to happen here. So, long story short here, or short story long, however you want to look at it, two choices when we want to get rid of a WINS record. We can delete it or we can tombstone it. Deleting it works just fine as long as you're on the machine that's the owner of the record. Otherwise, just mark it as tombstoned, and that'll permanently delete the record, although it may take several days, just depending upon your settings. Okay, last thing we're going to focus on is the WINS proxy agent. Okay, we're going to go back to our diagram here to talk about how this might work. Okay, and we talked about static entries already, so we have a little bit of an idea of how that works, but let's also talk about a WINS proxy agent. I'm just going to draw a router in here, put a client in here. This is going to be a Unix system, so once again, pardon the writing, but okay, a Unix system is a non-WINS client, Okay, so what ends up happening if a Unix system needs to resolve names? So let's say that it's got a program or whatever, and it needs to communicate with server 1. It's going to broadcast out here looking for server 1, and it's going to have no way of actually being able to communicate with server 1 using its NetBIOS name of server 1. Okay, and this machine's not capable of talking to a WINS server, so it's not going to be able to be configured with an IP address like most machines would be able to. Okay, and take the other alternative here. If we have a Windows machine who is a WINS client, so we'll just make it a WINS client. Man, my writing's getting worse. It can pass through a routed network, go talk to the WINS server, get the IP address, have that pass back, and then communicate directly with whichever server it's trying to communicate with. That's how WINS works, and any modern Windows client will be able to support that. Unix, however, will not. So what we can do instead is use what's known as a WINS proxy agent. Okay, and a WINS proxy agent works on behalf of the non-WINS client. And what I mean by that is, well, we heard of static entries before, right? Where we enter those in, and those also are supposedly for non-WINS clients. What's the difference? Why do we have static entries and the WINS proxy agent? Well, static entries are entered into the database to benefit all of our WINS clients. Okay, what that means is I'm going to put a static entry in for Unix 1. We're just going to give this computer a name, Unix 1. And this static entry in the database will allow XP1 and server 2 and this other machine down here to talk to server 1, get the IP address of Unix 1 because we statically entered it, and then communicate with Unix 1 just using its name. So that's what I mean by putting a static entry is for the benefit of all these machines. The WINS proxy agent, though, is not for the benefit of my WINS clients, but it's for the benefit of the non-WINS client. It's so Unix 1, Linux machines, pre-Windows 95 operating systems, so they can communicate and utilize WINS as well. What happens here is we set up a machine on this segment to act as what's called a WINS proxy agent. And the way this works, this Unix machine will broadcast out a NetBIOS name. Okay, so it's trying to communicate to server 1 here once again. Well, it's not going to get through this router because routers don't typically broadcast NetBIOS or pass NetBIOS broadcasts. What will happen though, if I configure this machine as a WINS proxy agent, so we'll just make it a WINS PA, it will intercept this broadcast, or hear it's probably a better word, and then act on behalf of Unix 1. It's going to take that information, go, oh, okay, let me help you out. It's going to come over here. It's going to pull the IP address. Okay, it's actually going to go to server 1, get the information it needs, and then it's going to give Unix 1 the information that it needs. Okay, so it's literally going to pull the information Unix 1 is looking for. So if it's trying to resolve a name for server 2, which it's broadcasting out for server 2, this machine is going to basically say, you know what, let me help you out. Let me find out what the IP address is for server 2 and I'll get back to you. So it goes across the routed network, goes to the WINS server, gets that IP address for server 2, hands it off to Unix 1, and then Unix 1, who can definitely use TCP/IP, now forms just a unicast with that IP address and talks directly to server 2. Okay, so that's basically how it works. It's any Wins client with a registry change can act as a Wins proxy agent. And that machine now is just basically acting on behalf of Unix 1 and helping out name resolutions. There are some limitations. The Wins proxy agent cannot register Unix 1 in this database. So you may think, well, I don't really need static entries because since this machine's working for Unix 1, it's probably going to take the name and IP address and plug that in here into this database. Well, it doesn't do that. So that's one weakness it has, one thing that it can't do. Okay, how do we configure this? Well, not too difficult, but it's definitely not a push button click either. Here we see that to configure the Wins proxy agent using a registry setting, we have to navigate to this registry key. Okay, H key, local machine, system, current control set, services, NetBT, and then parameters. So if we open up the registry by just typing in regedit, okay, we're going to navigate down through this whole system here. First we open up H key, local machine. Then we go down to system and open this up. Then we open up current control set. Then we open up services. Okay, then we're going down to NetBT. Okay, and what's this? It's NetBIOS over TCP/IP. Okay, and then we go down to parameters. And then what we're looking for is right within here. And if we go back here one more time, to configure a Wins proxy agent, edit the registry on a Wins enabled client by setting the value for the enable proxy entry to 1 and then restart the computer. Okay, so we're looking for the enable proxy entry. And to do that, what we'd have to do is look here for that enable proxy entry. Well, none exists. Okay, so that's basically stating to us we have to create this. And you can actually add this information. We could just put a value right in. You can go to new, key, okay, and then type in the information that you need to do. It's actually not what we wanted. So we'll delete that. We don't want to corrupt our registry. So from within parameters, this is where you want to get your new key in here. Or it's actually going to be different. It's going to be a string value. Okay, and then now we can type in the value. We'll call it enable proxy. If it's going to let us rename it. Okay, and then we can give data to that, our value there for that data. And we set this to 1 just as we're supposed to. How do we know this? Well, this is definitely one of those things that it's a reference type setting. You're not just going to memorize this. If you need to look this up, you'll have to go on the internet or watch this video, check it out, and come back in here again. Okay, so then once you configure this, you'll have to reboot your computer, and now this system is just sitting out there. It's going to be listening for those non-Wins clients to try to help them out. Okay, so any Wins client can do this. No big deal as far as how the configuration goes. Okay, that wraps up Lab 2. We'll see you back here real soon in Lab 3. We're going to talk about several different things. We'll go into the LMHOST file in a little bit more depth. We're going to work on disabling NetBIOS. We're up into server 2003 now, so we're going to actually disable NetBIOS, see what the effects are, see why you may or may not want to do that. And then we'll also talk about replication models. We'll get into Wins replication models and cover a mesh and also a hub and spoke environment. Thanks for choosing Trainson. We'll see you back here real soon.